Nohr is a melodic house artist known for emotive, minimal, and atmospheric productions. His breakout track You reached millions of streams, fueled in part by viral social media clips, and helped establish his signature melodic house sound. A blend of warm analog synths, understated drums, and simple yet deeply emotional melodies. Today we're going to be breaking down a track inspired by his sound, showing you how to achieve this style for your own productions. My name is Tom, this is 1 Point Audio, and here's the track that we'll be making. Alright, so let's start off with our drums. What we're looking for is going to be a nice and punchy kick drum. Whenever we're creating melodic house tracks in this style, we're looking for an analog sounding kick that has a nice and clicky attack transient, but still kind of understated. A lot of the drums in Nohr tracks are still very punchy, but they have this almost organic quality to them, so that's what we're going for with our kick drum here. And by the way, all the project files and presets that we're using are part of our Horizon Melodic House pack, so feel free to grab that down below in the description if you'd like. But I'll make sure to also show off all the patches so you could recreate them if you're just following along. For this kick drum, I went ahead and just pitched it down one semitone. We're going to be working in C major today, so that way everything sounds nice and context the whole track. And that's just mapped out to a simple 4 on the floor pattern. Next, let's build out the rest of the drums. In this case, we're going to be using a rim shot instead of a snare or a clap sound. A lot of Nohr's records use these filtered rim shot sounds, and these are used instead of traditional like claps or snares, and that gives you this more organic quality to the whole record. Here we have a very simple pattern. Our whole rim shot just sounds like this by itself, and that's just on those offbeats going with our kick drum. Underneath that, we have some hats happening on the offbeats. Here I'm layering together 3 different hats. I'm trying to get more of like an organic sounding hat that's a little bit more like a live sound, so that's why I have a couple of different samples all layered together. The next one sounds like this. A little more of like a live kind of splashy sounding hi-hat. The next one, it sounds like this. So kind of similar to that one, more of like a live acoustic sound. And then all together, all those hats sound like this. And they're just playing on those offbeats. And that just pushes that whole drum arrangement along, giving us some shuffle on those offbeats. The next part that I have here is the shaker loop. It's just a nice organic sounding shaker loop that has a bit of shuffle to it, and this helps give us more organic quality for the overall drum pattern, making it feel a bit more live. And in the case of this loop as well, I went ahead and pitched it down a couple of semitones, so that way it matched a bit better with the rest of the record. So if you're finding a sound almost works into production, you could always repitch it to help it fit a bit better with everything. Now the other thing that I have on that shaker loop is just a simple utility here for some volume adjustments. And then I also have this Kickstart 2 plugin, which is just a sidechain VST. And that way we could just sidechain it to the rest of the elements. This just helps it match a bit better with the kick drum. Now let's hop over to our next shaker loop, which sounds like this. I'll go ahead and turn off that sidechain for now. This one's a bit brighter, a little bit more of like an acoustic sound, has a couple of different Foley sounds baked into it as well. And this is down to semitones to help it match better with the other loops. And that just adds to that organic quality of the whole drum arrangement. Without him, everything feels pretty stiff and doesn't have a ton of groove to it. But with these 2 organic percussion loops, it ends up making that arrangement feel a lot more engaging. And I just use that in the second half of this drop section just to help kind of progress things along and to build out the whole arrangement. That's all for the individual drum samples. Everything's then put into this bus inside of Ableton. We have a little bit of a top-end frequency boost. And I just pushed everything into a touch of saturation here with the built-in saturator in Ableton, just to glue all those drum samples together. Now let's talk about the different synth patches that we'll be using. Nohr likes to use an analog synthesizer called a Moog Subsequent 37, which he features in a lot of his videos, and this tends to be used by a lot of different melodic house producers. Today we're going to be emulating some of those sounds inside of Serum 2, because you can actually get pretty close to the original sound using some built-in stuff inside of Serum. In the case of this bass line that we're going to be adding in here, we want a low analog-inspired bass line that's nice and warm and has some subtle pluck movement to it. So for this sound, we're going to be using a preset. This one's called Dusk. Again, it's from the Horizon sample pack, which you could grab down in the description. And this bass just sounds like this. If you're curious about the setup here, we have a basic mini Moog waveform here, which is one of the built-in wavetables inside of Serum. That's then layered with a higher, slightly widened version of that same waveform that's put up an octave. We have some very simple amplifier envelope movement to make it pluck. And then there's some filter movement helping move that filter as well. These are all the effects that are happening on the Serum patch. And if you're curious what the modulation entries are doing, here is all those different modulations. If you want to recreate the patch, you can just pause the video and go ahead and recreate that. One key takeaway from this patch that I'd recommend you mess around with inside of Serum if you're trying to make more warm analog style sounds is using this bode frequency shifter. Just by putting this in on its default state with no adjustments whatsoever, literally just leave it on 100% mix, it ends up actually thickening up that bass quite a bit. So if you haven't messed around with this, definitely recommend it. Now let's go ahead and look at the bass melody. So for this record, we're going to be in C major. You can also think about this as being an A minor because that's a minor equivalent of C major, but I think the arrangement overall makes a bit more sense if you think about it in C. So the first thing that you might realize looking at this bass is we're not starting on the 1. We're actually starting on the 4, which in this case is F, and then we're working our way back to the root note of the key, which is going to be in C. So we're doing a simple 4-1 pattern. What we're trying to do is create as minimal an arrangement as possible while still feeling melodically complex because we're playing chords across multiple different instruments. And all of those different melodies are all interacting with one another to make the whole arrangement feel more interesting. We could go ahead and also jump over to our lead sound here. I'm going to go and jump ahead just a little bit. And then I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see both here. Down here in the purple is going to be the bass, and this kind of green turquoise color is the lead synth. So they're not playing exactly the same notes. This one's playing an A note, and this one's playing an F. Then even on these bits, we're walking up, going back down to the root. We have this additional arrangements happening along with our main bass. What that does is creates a more interesting sounding arrangement where everything's not playing all the same root notes and going back to the main root of the key. Everything's working together to create an interesting arrangement. The other thing that's happening on this bass is there's quite a bit of movement happening. So it's not just a bunch of 16th notes, there's actually some groove happening. These simple bass grooves are something you'll hear on a lot of his tracks, and they're used to just make the entire arrangement feel more engaging. With these notes in the center, all we're doing is just walking up the different notes in the key, just to bridge the gap between the 4 and the 1. Only other things that are happening on this bass is a little bit of mid-frequency EQ cut. Just cleans it up a bit, and then we have that sidechain effect added into our bass. Now with that bass out of the way, let's start talking about our lead synth patch. So again here, we want something that's inspired by the Moog Subsequent 37. So for this lead, we'll be using a preset called Lumen. Very warm, analog-inspired tone. It also has a nice portamento between everything that's sliding between those notes, which is where you get some character for this lead synth. So taking a look at this patch, overall it's pretty simple, but there's a couple of additional things that we've added to make this patch a bit more unique because we are trying to emulate an analog style synth. So the first two things we have are these waveforms over here on the left-hand side, just two basic saw waves happening. This one is a unison saw wave that we can use to add in some additional width if we wanted. But in the case of this lead, I actually have that turned off in the macros, so we just have a single saw wave. The other thing that's layered in is this triangle wave from a Chord MS-20 synthesizer. This is a custom multi-sample that we created for this patch that samples a Chord MS-20, which is an analog synthesizer that has a very rich and warm analog tone, and that's layered in with this main saw wave, just to thicken everything up. And then to make this patch more engaging, we have a simple pluck happening with the amplifier envelope that's just controlling volume. We have a nice and short pluck happening on our analog Moog style filter. That's what this MG ladder filter is for. The other thing that's helpful on this synth is also LFO1 being on the sample and hold mode. This is almost used to create like a tape wobble style effect. So all the fine-tuned controls are being adjusted by that sample and hold LFO to create a tape wobble on the overall synth. And then I'll go ahead and just jump through the rest of this, just showing you off the different parts on the sound. just so you could pause this and recreate it if you'd like. Here's all those modulation entries. And feel free to ignore some of those macro ones if you're not creating the macros over here on the left. And if you're creating this from scratch, you obviously won't have these custom multi-samples, so feel free to use one of the new analog wavetables. So something like the triangle waves from the Moog Mother 32 or the Moog Model D will give you a similar type of effect. One of the key things to get right whenever you're working with this style of lead is to have a dynamically adjusting delay that reduces its intensity whenever the sound is playing, and then increases its dry-wet value once you're done playing the lead. We could do this inside of Ableton with an envelope follower. So if I take off all these effects, this sound is actually quite dry. And then what we have here is a delay sound, just creating a simple ping pong delay with a feedback of 45. That way it's just bouncing from left to right. And then we have this envelope follower, which is taking the output of our volume, and that's being mapped to the dry-wet control. So all you have to do to create this is go to this menu right here in Ableton, hit map, select whatever you'd like. I'll just go ahead and select our reverb. Then once that's selected, we want to put a value of 25 and a value of 0. Then what this does is whenever I'm playing a sound, it reduces the amount of effect happening. Then once I release the note that I'm playing, that delay, or that reverb in this case, swells in. That's how you would set that up. Then I just have this reverb unit that's adding some nice splashy reverb to everything, a little bit of saturation, a touch of compression, and in this case it's not doing a ton. Just kind of grabbing some of those peaks that are jumping out whenever we have these notes opening with our filter. And then there's this utility plugin that's just used for some volume automation. And then we have our sidechain effect here with the Kickstart 2 again, just to provide some simple sidechain. And then we could jump into our melody and start talking about the arrangement of it. So one of the most important things whenever you're trying to make tracks in this style is to make sure that your lead has kind of a constant sense of motion to it. There's a couple of ways that we achieve this, the first of which is by not constantly going back to the root of the whole key. So we do play around a little bit with C, which in the case is the root note of our whole key here, but we're playing around this section. We're going up and then down to A, and then we have these additional accent notes, and we're not constantly going back to C. This is intentional because what this does is creates an evolving melody that never fully resolves, but still sounds nice and melodic. That's how you create these tracks that constantly feel like they're evolving and changing, and they don't get overly repetitive, even though the arrangements are extremely simple. The other thing that we have happening here is lots of jumps between the different notes, and then there's actually a portamento on the actual synth, and that's used to slide between those different notes. So if we take a listen to our melody, I've went ahead and turned off those delays for now. So that slide is a unique characteristic that you hear in this lead. Without it, you lose a lot of character on the sound. The other thing that's happening with our arrangement is the melody is actually happening slightly before the beginning of the bar. So instead of just having the melody start on the downbeat, we actually have it happen slightly before. Listen to what this sounds like whenever we actually just have this start on the downbeat. I'm going to take my entire melody, I'm going to select everything, and then we can just push this over slightly so it all starts on that downbeat. It almost sounds like there's way too much dead space in between the different elements, so playing around with the actual placement of the overall melody is a key characteristic that you hear in a lot of Nohr's tracks. This happens on the lead synth in the track Let Me Know. And then if you also listen to You, a lot of those modulated pads, which kind of act as the lead synthesizer on those tracks, don't actually start directly on the downbeat, which is what contributes to its constantly evolving feeling. The other thing we have happening on this lead to make it more engaging is some filter movement that's mapped to the velocity curve. So as I increase the note velocity, it's going to open up that sound. And you can play around with that to create more dynamic melodies. So some notes have less filtering, some have more, and it creates these very organic sounding melodies, even though they're created with synthesizers. If you want to map that, it's very simple to do inside of Serum. All you have to do is just go over to your velocity section in the synth, and then drag that over to your filter. In this case, we've already done that, which you can see here. And as we play around with the different velocities, the filter's position is jumping around. The other thing in this melody that makes it more engaging is these jumps up that are happening with these notes. So this is jumping in this case from a D to a G. But if we have this kind of have just a descending pattern, it doesn't have the same effect. As opposed to this. It creates a nice emotional moment for the listener, and we're also opening that filter up to accent that note as well. That covers that main lead synth. I have that copied over to create an intro section over here, and the only change that I made is I have some filtering happening. And that's created by these very extreme cutoff curves happening on this filter inside of Ableton. So without it, we're actually trying to intentionally create this almost lo-fi effect by creating some artifacts with the actual EQ. You can also use a VST like Goodhertz Lossy to do the same thing, but in this case, we're just doing it with stock Ableton plugins. And this is just used to create an intro section for the whole track. So last thing on this lead synthesizer patch you'll want to be aware of is this feedback automation. So it stays at about 45% for most of this, and then at the end here we create almost a delay throw by increasing the feedback, so that way we get this nice and bouncy sound happening at the end. So whenever you're trying to create music that's a bit more minimal like this song, using clever automations to make your whole arrangement feel more engaging and interesting is a great way of adding variation without making things more complex. The other key characteristic that you hear on a lot of Nohr's tracks is these modulated pads that sound like this. This patch is actually deceptively complicated, but I'll go ahead and show you how this sound works. So these are normally done with the Moog Subsequent 37 again, but in our case, we'll go ahead and do this with Serum. The overall patch is actually quite simple. We have these Model D waveforms here at the top. They're slightly detuned off of one another and slightly different phase. And we also have a score wave as well, just to kind of add some nice thickness. And there's also a touch of white noise. Now what this sound is a couple of different modulators all interacting with one another and adjusting the filter movement, the volume movement, the amount of filter, and also the speed of that filter movement as well. To show off this whole patch, let me go over to the mod matrix, and I'm going to bypass all of these LFO entries, just so you can hear exactly what this is doing before we start moving the patch. So we're just playing some simple chords, and if we go over to our amplifier envelope, it's just taking the volume and fading it in a little bit. So that's creating a volume movement on the beginning of it with envelope number 1, and creating some filter movement with envelope number 2, just slowly fading in that sound. Now here's where things get interesting. The first modulation entry we have is this LFO number 1 that's set to a freely cycling wave, so this isn't locked to the BPM of the track, and this is being mapped to the filter's frequency. So it's a very fast modulation that's happening on our filter. Then the next modulation entry is LFO number 2, and that's modulating the rate of this first LFO. So if we go to LFO number 2, we have a freely cycling waveform again. So it starts off on a really slow speed and then increases the overall speed of this LFO. And then this is where this patch gets a little complicated. Then we take the first LFO and we map that to the rate of the second LFO. So now this one is modulating this rate and this rate is modulating this one. So they're kind of doing this cross modulation between each other. And this is where we get all the character of that whole sound. So without it, and with it. That's also why we have this weird looking waveform here at the end. This is used to adjust the speed of the second half of that chord pattern. So that way we can kind of catch that modulation at the right moment, so it sounds rhythmic with the track. And if you're curious about the rest of this patch, I'll go ahead and just scroll through it just so you can see that. And you can always stop the video if you'd like. And these are all the effects. We have some delay, chorus, compression, a little bit of reverb, and then this is a limiter here at the end. By the way, on the compressor, if you take the ratio and put it all the way up, it turns into a limiter. And then we didn't have anything in the mixer, and then here is that main patch. you're curious about the notes that are being played, we have an A note and an E note, and we're basically just using those chords all over this track. Now on top of that, there is a bit of EQing to cut out some highs and lows, and some kickstart too to provide some sidechaining, and that's just used to help everything match a bit better with the overall track. The nice part is too, once you have this sound set up, you can literally just play chords and you don't have to go through and create all these complicated automations. Then looking at the next modulated pad, basically the exact same setup, except we have kind of a dry version. I think I took the reverb and turned it off in this case. The only other change that was happening is going to be on this LFO number 2, where we have it going from a fast speed to a slow speed. So on this one, turned off a couple of the different effects. So we took the mix control on that reverb and just turned it down. Chopped out some lows, added a little bit of ping pong delay just to create some width. And then we have those exact same chords happening, that A and that E. And I have it start slightly early just so it overlaps with the other section. Again, kind of staying with that same theme of everything not starting on the downbeat. Whenever you're listening to tracks like You, those modulated pads that are happening in the background also don't happen exactly on the downbeat. The next sound that we have in this track is this very simple ambient lead that sounds like this. So this is a patch called Echoes. I actually used the built-in MIDI for this to create this kind of ambient element. I had to switch the key just slightly, so I just dragged that into my DAW, and then went over here and just did that same A and the E note. Very simple ambient patch with some subtle filter movement. And that filter is also velocity tracked as well. So as these different notes are playing, we're playing around with the velocity to create this kind of sequence style ambient melody. Then it also has some kickstart 2 layered into it as well. Then from there, there's a couple of different pad sounds that are layered in throughout the drop. These are all fairly simple sounds, so in this case, it's just a couple of saw waves. Again, same chords, kind of just following the main progression. And we also have our same sidechain effect on there too. And then for this other pad sound in here, which sounds like this. We have the same chords that we used in the previous pad, just a slightly different voicing here. So this G's moved from a higher up voicing down an octave. And that's another one of these kind of simple saturated pads. So it has a simple filter movement, just slowly opening up that filter. And then the character of it comes from this overdrive saturation that's added to everything, just to kind of thicken it up and add a bit of texture to the overall track. Then we have a couple additional pads. This is another saw pad, playing the same notes again. In the case of this one, it's slowly fading in here. And that just has some very simple automation on it, just to open it up. And then whenever that lead sound drops in, it cuts out. Then to continue building out that section, we have this delay lead that's happening on the downbeat, just to help accentuate everything. And that's playing those same chords, and it just is a very simple lead that sounds like this. And that's been heavily filtered to help it sort of sit in the background. Then the same Kickstart 2 plugin there for the sidechaining. This is definitely the quickest and easiest way to sidechain, by the way. And it's a very inexpensive plugin. I think it's only like $15, so definitely check this out if you haven't gotten already. Makes sidechaining a lot easier. And then the last pad that we have is this distorted pad. And the main takeaway from this sound is the texture that's being added to everything through the phase distortion. So on this patch, there is a white noise. You can't even actually hear it on its own. But what we have here is some phase distortion that's using that white noise as its main signal. And as we increase this value, you start hearing that white noise almost overlaid into the actual waveform. And when used more subtly, you get these kind of nice textured sounds, where it almost sounds like this ultra clean overdrive effect. Then there's a little bit of auto pan being added just to kind of push it left to right, but a ping pong delay to do the same thing. So we have it bouncing from left to right. And there's also a touch of equalization as well, just to add some high frequencies and to cut some lows. Then we have some width on the utility plugin and the Kickstart 2 plugin again. So that's all for those pads. The final thing that we have on this track is just some simple swoosh effects. So we have this fall sound, very simple, like textured white noise riser that's been reversed. And then we also have this riser just to help move into the different sections. Interestingly enough, this actually fills out the overall arrangement quite a bit. Without it, it feels kind of dull and empty, but with it, it ends up making this whole drop section feel a lot more engaging. Let's be without it. So don't forget to add in some strategic white noise risers and effect sweeps, because they can end up being that thing that brings the whole arrangement all together. So that's the entire arrangement for this melodic house track. If you'd like to grab any of the sounds used in this video or this project file, feel free to click on the link in the description to grab our Horizon bundle. It has over 120 different Serum presets, drums, project files, and everything you need to make melodic house. So here's what everything in this final track sounds like all together. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and also comment below with any future suggestions for more videos that you'd like to see. Thank you so much for checking out this video, and I'll see you next time.